Hello, everyone, and welcome back. Kelly Boone here from Tech and Learning. I want to thank everyone for attending today's Future Proofing Your District conference, and a special thank you to all of today's sponsors, Catch On, Classcraft, FileWave, Global Teletherapy, GradeCam, and Sanford Programs. And also thank you to all of our association partners. Today's virtual conference is focused on taking lessons learned from the current remote learning programs to create long-term plans that support effective teaching and learning both online and in person. I want to remind everyone to log into the Conference Hub using the links that were sent in your confirmation email. Once you're logged in, you can visit sponsor booths, and live chat with them. You can personalize your agenda, change any sessions that you might have chosen, and network with over 1,100 of today's virtual attendees via the registrant directory. You can also access the recordings of today's events via the download sections as soon as the events are over. And then of course you can win prizes. So throughout the Conference Hub, you'll find several buttons where you can enter yourself into the passport to prizes. They are located all over the Conference Hub on the sponsor pages as well as all of the pages. You can enter once for every button that you find, so you can have multiple entries, however, only one winner per person. So before we begin, I just want to cover a couple housekeeping items. If you have any questions for the presenter during the webinar, please submit them through the Zoom chat feature. Please know that we'll capture any and all questions, and our presenters are happy to answer them as long as time permits. If we do run out of time, there is a chat with speakers section on the Conference Hub, and we'll make sure that all of those questions get over to the speakers as well if the session ends and your question didn't get answered. Today's slides and additional resource materials will be available and can be accessed within the download section of the Hub, and we encourage everyone to download any resources or links that might be useful. Be sure to use the conference hashtag TLTechLive in any social posts today. And with that, I want to join me in thanking our terrific speakers who have kindly agreed to spend some time with us today. Today's presentation is developing an instructional continuity plan for an emergency. And I'm going to pass it over to Marie Izquierdo, the Chief Academic Officer over at Miami-Dade County Public Schools. Marie?
Hello, and welcome to Developing an Instructional Continuity Plan for Any Emergency. My name is Marie Izquierdo, and I am the Chief Academic Officer in Miami-Dade County Public Schools, the nation's fourth largest school district. Today, I will be sharing with you steps that we have taken to develop an instructional continuity plan that supports teachers, students, and their families during an unprecedented crisis in our nation, one that has forced schoolhouses to close their doors to over 50 million students across the United States. This global pandemic has wrought havoc on our country and our lives, and is poised to widen achievement gaps for students that may take years to recover from. School districts across the country scrambled in a matter of weeks to shift teaching and learning from the classroom to the cloud, some more nimbly than others. Miami-Dade has been described as one of those who has been able to navigate this shift more adeptly. And today, I'm going to share with you some of the steps that we took to provide continuity of instruction and, more importantly, continuity of learning for our students. But first, let me acquaint you with the scale of Miami-Dade. The district sits in the southeast region of Florida and is a hotspot for COVID, with nearly 17,000 confirmed cases to date. We have a teacher workforce of nearly 20,000. We closed our schools on March 13th and began phase 1 of distance learning on March 16th. Phase 2 began after 1 week of spring break, with attendance being taken and grades being assigned beginning April 6th. In 2012, our voters overwhelmingly supported a $1.2 billion general obligation bond that launched an initiative called Digital Convergence, bringing large investments in instructional technology from infrastructure, Wi-Fi connectivity, devices, and professional development for our schools. This vision and those investments were instrumental in our readiness to deal with the COVID crisis and our ability to react as expeditiously as possible in standing up distance learning for our students and their families. Miami is a very diverse community, and that diversity is reflected in our students. The most challenging aspect of that diversity is poverty, with many students living well below the poverty level and lacking, among other things, technology and internet connectivity at home. Like many educators across the country, we began concerning ourselves with the probability of school closures due to the growing pandemic in early February. By mid-February, we had started working on our first instructional continuity plan. It was similar to plans that we had crafted in the past as a result of hurricanes, which caused short-term closure of schools. At that time, we did not anticipate long-term closures like the ones that became apparent just a few weeks after that, and frankly, prompted the development of an even more comprehensive and explicit ICP, which you can find at icp.dadeschools.net. By early March, we had our first draft of ICP 1.0 drafted and began in earnest to develop contingency plans in the, quote, unlikely event of school closures, as we like to say back then. By March 6th, we realized that closures were, in fact, more than likely, and we issued a short survey to students and families to assess internet connectivity and access to computers at home. The survey was placed on our parent and student portals, communicated out via social media, robocalls home, and letters sent home with students. And students were urged to complete the surveys while in school as well. Within a week, we knew how large a problem we were confronting. With 208,000 survey respondents, 26,000 students indicated that they lacked internet connectivity at home, and about 40,000 said they would need to be issued a device for home from school. Thankfully, because of our investments in laptops, as well as a Verizon grant that supports 6 middle schools in our district, we had about 200,000 devices in our arsenal. The biggest challenge was certainly going to be connectivity. We began speaking to partners such as Comcast, who immediately began sharing information regarding their Internet Essentials program, and Sprint, who had partnered with us in the Million Project to enable us to distribute Samsung cellular phones to be used as mobile hotspots to help fill that gap of connectivity that would no doubt cause a deep divide between students and families with and without internet connections at home when it came to the continuity of learning. We also curated all digital assets, software licenses that we owned across grade levels and subjects to provide teachers with tools that could support the virtual lessons. And we began developing guidance with expectations regarding synchronous and asynchronous instruction along with our teacher union leaders. We designated 2 school days to professional development so that teachers could either be onboarded or reacquainted with digital tools and practices for distance learning, and leaned heavily on partners such as Microsoft, Curriculum Associates, Nearpod, and many others to help us load over 40 live and on-demand webinars for teachers, as well as staff a call center dedicated to taking calls from parents, teachers, and students for all things distance learning. We crafted a perpetual frequently asked questions document that is frequently updated and sits on our district's homepage, and monitored social media regularly to get a pulse on satisfaction and/or confusion from stakeholders, offering on-the-fly responses to get the word out about everything from the postponement of advanced placement exams to grading, to screen time expectations by grade level. We worked around the clock putting out fires those first few weeks immediately after school closures. 2 days before school closures, all schools conducted an emergency faculty meeting. In this meeting, teachers were presented with the district's Instructional Continuity Plan, or ICP. They were provided a general overview of the plan with a specific focus on the most time-sensitive tasks around creating an individualized plan to meet their individual student needs and provide these instructions to students prior to them departing for the weekend. The PowerPoint, script, and related school closure student checklists were developed by the central office in an effort to provide consistent messaging to homes and clarity of instructions. These checklists provided students and families with steps they would need to take before and during school closures to ensure continuity of learning, as well as the mediums by which their individual teachers were planning on communicating with them. Teachers were provided with checklists as well that guided them through steps on how to prepare for online teaching, ranging from planning their classes, preparing to use the technology, setting up their working online environment, how to communicate with students and motivating students throughout school closures. Similarly, checklists were developed for school leaders to help them prepare as well. Those steps included how to share the ICP and support their teachers during this transition, getting students to complete the mobile device survey, conducting their emergency faculty meetings, how to handle the distribution of devices to students and teachers if necessary, how to support their most fragile students, and how to maintain open lines of communication with stakeholders during school closures, to name a few. Many of the resources developed for educators, students, and parents can be found at distancelearning.dadeschools.net. Sample checklists, survey questions, and parent letters, as well as device agreements, can be found within the ICP 2.0 itself at icp.dadeschools.net. Now, let's take a deeper dive into the components of the ICP. The initial ICP focused on three main components: content delivery, mobile devices, and internet access. We recognized that those would be the pillars that would support distance learning in our district, and that both families as well as instructional personnel needed to become acquainted on how these aspects of distance learning would be addressed, as well as the roles that educators, parents, and students played in the success of instructional continuity. Over the next few minutes, we will take a deeper dive into several sections of this plan in order to ensure that there is a smooth path to achieving the goal of continued teaching and learning, while also providing a process for teacher interaction with students and families. As I mentioned before, ICP 1.0 was developed as a stopgap measure when we thought we were looking at a week or two of school closures. As early as March 18th, we realized that we needed to finesse our plan even further, and the development of ICP 2.0 began in earnest. It was published on April 3rd. It defined roles for parents, students, and teachers more explicitly. It recognized that students and teachers could not possibly be required to spend the same amount of time online as they spent in the schoolhouse teaching and learning. It narrowed the content of digital assets, cut back on assignments and volume of schoolwork, offered guidance in terms of providing students feedback in the form of grades, and included revised pacing guides and time on task cards appropriate for different grade levels by subject. If you visit icp.dadeschools.net, you can download ICP 2.0. Here are some of the roles that we envisioned for students, parents, and teachers. Across the top, you'll notice a navigation bar that takes you directly to the different chapters of the plan. The first section, after the introduction, is content delivery. For the past 7 years, MDCPS has participated in a digital convergence of instructional routines, content, and environments. Because of this convergence, many teachers had participated in a wide variety of instructional professional development and initiatives and had explored different forms of blended and flipped learning. For many, those experiences proved invaluable as teachers transitioned their lessons from the classroom to the cloud. In the spirit of continuity and normalcy, we asked those teachers who were already providing digital content that was standards aligned and course aligned to continue to do so, thereby allowing their students to find comfort in the routines they were already familiar with. We asked teachers to please keep as many things as they could the same to the extent possible, such as bell ringers, warm-ups, exit slips, etc. We knew we had entrenched best practices, and we did not want to be so prescriptive as a district that we would derail those practices when they were already occurring. This was particularly difficult to stick to in the first couple of weeks, when parents, understandably, began complaining about having to navigate multiple platforms and check different mediums to access assignments, particularly in homes with multiple children. We are also aware that on this journey to digital convergence, many classrooms were still in the nascent steps or stages of blended learning. And because of this unplanned, expedited transition, many teachers would need more explicit guidance and access to a fully digital environment. When it came to devices, that survey that we conducted during the week of March 9th proved to be a vital lever in our remote learning journey. It allowed us to assess need and position our inventory in a manner that would allow us to deploy laptops in an expeditious and strategic way. On March 13th, when students walked out of school, over 32,000 of them did so with a computer in hand, along with their teachers' school closure student checklists. We continued mobile device distribution throughout that weekend, and by Sunday, we had surpassed the 42,000 device threshold that our surveys had indicated were needed. To date, we have issued over 115,000 devices, many for homes with multiple students, others as swap outs for devices that were slow or damaged, and our daily virtual attendance hovers around 91%. While the original ICP provided teachers the same flexibility, ICP 2.0 provided clearer guidance to teachers and parents regarding the resources available to students. As they had done in their classrooms, teachers had the choice and flexibility to deliver content to students through the district-provided digital resources with teacher direction to focus on specific skills instruction, or through teacher-identified and vetted resources, or through a combination or hybrid approach. We realized that with a teacher core of 20,000, we were going to have teachers on a broad spectrum when it came to distance learning, and we wanted to be able to support our teachers wherever they were on that continuum. To that end, we formulated 3 different models for instructional delivery. The first model is teacher-directed. This model leans on collaboration and communication tools. The teacher provides the resources and instructions. The teacher also provides instruction recorded or via live lessons through digital platforms such as Microsoft Teams, Edmodo, ClassDojo, and others. Student communication with the teacher occurs through the digital platforms and can also occur through phones with mediums such as Google Voice. And the teacher uses teacher-selected materials, either digital links, print materials, or district-adopted textbooks. The second model for instructional delivery is teacher-assigned. This is a more self-paced, personalized model that relies on resources that are accessed through the MDCPS student portal. Instruction is provided mainly through district-licensed adaptive online content resources, such as Edgenuity, iReady, and Gizmo. Personalized instruction through menu-driven activities allow for self-pacing, monitoring of student time on task, and task completion. The teacher assigns and then monitors student completion. Student communication through district-licensed online content resources occur as well as over the phone or other digital platforms selected by the teacher. The last model is a hybrid one, whereby the teacher combines both teacher-directed instruction with self-paced digital content. In content delivery, we also included several document downloads that were quick references to tools such as using text-to-speech tools, supplemental resources for parents of students on a modified curricula, accessibility features for students needing accommodations, occupational and physical therapy supports, and at-home learning for families. In content delivery, there are 4 vital components of the ICP. The first are the instructional continuity pacing guides. The second, student time on task cards. Third, provisions for ESE modified curriculum students. And last, digital resources. The district has pacing guides, which are also known as scope and sequences for every course offered. Immediately upon school closures, the academic team began modifying 4th quarter pacing guides to better align with distance learning tools as well as to compress the curricula as expectations regarding time on task had been altered, and the school day essentially compressed. This effort took a, quote, build the plane as you fly it approach, with academic personnel staying about 2 weeks ahead of students and teachers in their development. The team embedded many of the digital assets into these instructional continuity plans, or ICPGs, in order to provide students and families a more realistic, yet strategic learning experience, focusing on prerequisite skills and content for the subsequent school year. This is a third grade mathematics example. This is a sixth grade ELA example. As you can see, central office staff developed these 2-week guides, which included the standards to be covered, suggested assignments, digital connections in terms of those licenses I shared with you earlier, and additional resources that the teacher may want to use. In some cases, like this 11th grade US History ICPG, staff was only able to stay a week ahead of the teachers and students in developing them. The next component in the ICP under content delivery are the student time on task cards. These were created as a result of growing discontent from students and their families regarding the inordinate hours that students were taking in virtual schooling. During phase 1 of distance learning, it became very clear to us that we had not envisioned students spending the length of a typical school day engaged in online learning. Many teachers were over-assigning work and further frustrating families who were already under enormous stress. That is what birthed our student time on task cards. These cards, developed by Gradeband, suggest what we recommend as appropriate in terms of students engaging in online learning. For instance, for students in grades 2 through 5, it was suggested that they be engaged in academic activities for approximately 3 hours and 30 minutes daily. The remainder of the day could be spent playing, drawing, dancing, helping a family member cook, or listening to music. The whole child was considered, and activities for mental wellness checks were embedded in the ICPGs as well. Like most districts, Miami-Dade has many software licenses that support a broad band of subjects and grade levels. Over the past several years, we have focused on curating these digital assets and pruning away those that, through a yearly review process, frankly, were not providing the return on investment we were expecting. This pruning and analysis of impact has allowed us to focus our efforts on better implementation of programs, monitoring of student progress and usage, and teacher professional development. Titles span pre-K to 12th grade across, some serving as core and others as supplemental materials for instruction. An important part of our ICP is the inclusion of these titles by grade and subject, as well as the inclusion of licenses that support students with disabilities on a modified curricular program. By April 6th, we wanted to have a way to gauge student engagement and participation in schooling. Lacking an LMS, we determined that the best way to, quote, take attendance and monitor student engagement was through our very own student portal. We developed a sign-in page for students to affirm their attendance. For these measures to work, we needed to ensure that all students were using and checking their district email account regularly, and we had to provide QR codes for our youngest learners, as well as for students with significant disabilities who could not enter online credentials successfully. We provided written guidance to both parents and students on how attendance would be taken, and offered an appeals process for students and families who could show evidence that they had in fact worked virtually, yet their attendance wasn't captured somehow. And we provided and continue to provide principals with daily reports of students who do not log on so that they can follow up and send robocalls to students' homes who were, quote, absent. We have learned many lessons along the way. When it comes to mobile devices, we have learned that we don't wait for an emergency. We must be able to act nimbly and swiftly in case of a national emergency, one that creates closures of schools. To that end, districts should continue to invest in resources such as laptops, iPads, and other types of devices that can be checked out to students, including headphones and mobile hotspots. Districts can also not do this work alone. We need to be able to elicit our partners, our software providers, our hardware providers, our internet service providers, to make sure that together we are a united front to ensure the continuity of learning. In order to be effective in the event of a school closure, we also have to understand the breadth of our gap. Those surveys we took in early March were instrumental in staging and preparing for different scenarios if school closures became evident. Having mobile device contracts in multiple languages for parents is also essential, so that everyone understands the rules of engagement when it comes to loaning of devices and the expectations for their usage and for their return. School districts should also be prepared to make appointments. A district as large as Miami-Dade, we did not want families to wrap around the street corner waiting for a device when contagion was high. So we rested and relied on applications such as Calendly and others so that parents could either call in to make an appointment or use an internet application to make an appointment to pick up a device at a school site or a distribution center. School districts should also think very strongly about investing in an asset management tracking tool. This allowed us to be able to move devices from one neighborhood to another, from one school to another, and continue to balance the loads of devices as demand increased across zip codes in our district. Creating dashboards to monitor student needs, such as the dashboards that we created with Power BI, allowing us to see what type of students had checked out a device, what students had not, what students are not logging in on a regular basis, what students are having attendance issues online, helps us to make sure that we are strategic and intentional about serving our most fragile students first. And then turning our attention to what are students going to be asked to do during the summer. Summer programming for continuity of instruction, as well as making sure that we know if we're going to have students continue to keep devices at home over the summer instead of turning them in at the end of the school year. There are also lessons to be learned and reflections from our communications. Early on, we realized that we did not want to disrupt established methods of communication that teachers and students had established over the beginning of the school year. We also wanted to ensure that we created a standard form to communicate expectations, whether it be the ICP or the mobile device agreements, or the roles of parents, teachers, and students, or the student closure checklist. A unity of message and a single voice was very important to us, particularly because we have parents with students at multiple schools. Encouraging the use of a primary platform and providing support rather than dictating it was also critical. While we allowed teachers to continue to utilize methods of communication and platforms that they were familiar with, we also encouraged them to use our preferred platform. And for us, that was Microsoft Teams. It wasn't imposed on them, but rather they were provided with support. At the beginning, prior to school closures, we had 18,000 Microsoft Teams users. Today, the district has over 250,000 of them. The support and the professional development, both for the teachers, the students, and the parents and families, is vitally important. We created guides that help parents along this journey as well, in multiple languages. We were feverish about trolling social media to see what pockets of improvement we had. Where were parents having a hard time? What were students complaining about? And what were difficulties teachers were experiencing? We oftentimes replied on social media platforms directly and then adjusted our behaviors in the central office to make sure that we were remediating any type of disruptions or difficulties that our families, our students, and our teachers were having. We created a frequently asked questions document that is posted visibly on our main homepage, and we continue to update it regularly. And we have had to ensure online safety for all from the very, very beginning. As many of you know, shortly after school closures, Zoom began offering a free version to any user, and despite our best efforts initially for teachers to use Microsoft Teams, a licensed and secure platform, many flocked to Zoom, particularly because they could see all of their students on the communications platform. And then the headlines started rolling in about Zoom bombing and unwanted visitors in virtual classroom meetings. We immediately pivoted and purchased the enterprise version of Zoom, whereby users had to enter via the student and teacher portals, requiring credentialed authentication and the ability to keep participants in waiting rooms until the host permits entry. It took a bit of time to get this right, as we had to have teachers delete free Zoom versions that they had downloaded onto their computers and reinstall the enterprise version, but we finally got it right. Today, teachers share all kinds of tips and resources for online security with one another through Microsoft Teams, as well as Facebook's Workplace, a collaboration and communication tool that connects employees within an organization to one another via an internet social network. We developed webinars for parents and detailed ways in which they can ensure their children are safe while online. We continue to provide PD on a host of topics, many platform-specific, outlining how to keep themselves and their students safe. And our helpline provides support to parents, students, and teachers Monday to Friday from 8 a.m. to 4 p.m. This pandemic and its resulting impact on schooling in America has served to highlight the dependence that families have on educators and schools in general. It has forced parents, many dealing with their own trauma and struggle to make ends meet, often having to work from home without childcare, to become teacher aides, and the connection between the school and the home have never been as intertwined. For students to be successful in this ecosystem, parents need to be supported too. That is why for us, shoring up and expanding the role of the Parent Academy became so vitally important. Today, the Parent Academy serves as a hub for parents and guardians to access important resources that can best position their child for success, bringing experts into the home, albeit virtually, to assist parents on topics ranging from supporting their student with a disability to ensuring online safety for their family, to understanding our ICP, to navigating Microsoft Teams and our distance learning platform of choice. These webinars, available in 3 languages, have hundreds of views a day, and many more are in development. No doubt, educators nor families can do this alone. We must rely on each other to support our children and to ensure that even during the times of great distress and unknowns, one thing is constant, that the schoolhouse, whether it be brick and mortar or virtual, will always be there to help students continue to grow so that they can provide solutions to the problems of tomorrow. Thank you for participating in developing an instructional continuity plan. I look forward to taking your questions.
I hope you all enjoyed that. I do have a couple of questions in the chat that I am going to try to address. I read and answer at the same time, so bear with me. But before I do that, just a couple of overarching things, and many of them I've already stated. First of all, nobody was really prepared for this crisis. Certainly, I feel that Miami-Dade was better prepared or somewhat prepared because of investments that we had done on the device end and on the instructional technology professional development end. So that positioned us into a posture that was better to defend against, right, and prepare for the inevitable closing of schools. I can't urge educators and school district leaders enough to be very thoughtful and think of the impact that instructional technology has on student learning, regardless of whether there are closures or there aren't closures in schools. Thankfully, the vision of our school board and the vision of our superintendent 6 years before anyone knew the word COVID really paid off in terms of at least having that infrastructure in place. What it allowed us to do was to try to focus our efforts on the instructional side a little bit more than maybe other locations across the globe that were just trying to get devices out to students. So that was very, very helpful. Also, the fact that, unfortunately, we don't believe that school closures are a one and done kind of situation with COVID-19. We believe that there will be other circumstances across the globe that will force us to look at our schoolhouses a little bit differently and how we deliver instruction and how we do schooling in America and around the world. And so preparing for that long after this crisis is over, I think is really important. In addition, in terms of things that we did, some of the things that I shared with you today are, hopefully, my intention is to get your juices flowing around tools and resources that districts can set up as a school closure becomes inevitable. I know that as teachers, we love to kind of steal from one another and, take a lesson plan here or take a worksheet there. But I really strongly do not believe that you can just pick up the resources of Miami-Dade or any other district for that matter and apply it to your own. So what I'm trying to do and what I try to do when I speak publicly is to kind of share like the thought process and how we came about and what we were considering, and some of the artifacts certainly that we utilized, but not in so much of a cookie cutter, like you can take it and now use it in your district or in your school district, because it wouldn't work. For instance, some of you were asking me about our checklists, right? And I have the checklist. Actually, I double checked online because everything of ours is online. These are not online only because they were part of Instructional Continuity Plan 1. Our first iteration of our ICP. And so once we did ICP 2, we were already long past school closures. That was launched on April 6th. So these checklists are not part of that, but we'll figure out a way of putting that up there so that folks can see it. But the ICPs, for instance, the checklists are not like, you can't just take them and use them as your own, because they speak to the content that we purchase. They speak to the actual curated resources that we have in language arts, in mathematics, in science, etc., so that the student and the parents understand what are the resources that we're going to be using. But I know it's hard to see, but this is what one of them looks like. This is an elementary one. And essentially it's broken down into a couple of pieces. And this is not the final. We actually changed the final, and I'll tell you what we added in a minute. But for instance, and it looks just like a checklist. This is the elementary one. We had a secondary one as well. What to do before your school closes. So if your school closes, it is important that you're prepared to continue your studies at home. Review the checklist below so you know what to do before your school closes, while it is closed, and after it reopens. So some of the items to do are: let your teacher know if you need a computer at home to complete assignments. Complete the mobile device online survey. If you need a mobile device, take a mobile device agreement home for parents to sign. Bring the signed mobile device agreement home. Listen carefully to any instructions from your teacher in your school about what you will be doing during school closures, and visit icp.dadeschools.net for more information. That's before your school closes. So that was like the rush of March 9th through the 13th. And so every student went home with one of these, with a laptop if they needed it. And then also there was another form that we created where the teacher was completing and telling the families and the students how they were going to communicate. And I'll get to that in a minute because there's a question about that. And then what to do once your school is closed. And then after your school reopens. So this is essentially what one of the checklists looks like. They had different iterations. We also had checklists for the school. This is for the teacher rather. So how to prepare for online learning, and it had steps. Plan your classes, prepare to use technology, set up your work online environment, communicate with students daily, and motivate your students. And then it had suggestions under each of those. And then there was a different checklist for principals. So principals, this is again, is the week of, between March 6th and March 13th. Immediately, you need to implement the following immediately. So share the ICP with your teachers, get all students to complete the mobile device survey, administer the survey to students in computer labs if necessary, survey the teachers and see if they need any devices, collect any mobile device acknowledgement agreements. So kind of those things. We had a faculty meeting for every school. It was centrally developed, the actual presentation. So make sure you have your emergency faculty meeting. Make sure you're using this PowerPoint for your emergency faculty meeting. Hand out your student checklist and your teacher planning checklist at your faculty meeting, those kind of things. Then what to implement upon receiving notification of the closure, which happened on March 13th. what to do after closures and what to do upon return. So they're really unique to the individual school district. Now, I had a question here that I'm going to try to go back to because it was pertinent to what I just said. I want to say that it was around platforms, and it was, why don't districts, it's from Jim Flanagan, why don't districts require standard adoption of platform tools like Teams, Classroom, I'm assuming that's Google Classroom, et cetera, like other professional organizations do? So this is just my opinion, Jim, but first and foremost, we believe very strongly that when the crisis emerged, because we had been doing this work for 6 years, and different teachers had participated in different professional development, and different teachers, particularly by grade band and also by subject area, utilized different tools. We didn't want to sever that last bit of a pipeline that families and teachers had. So think through this. Help me think through this. So we're going to close schools. We don't know when we're going to come back. We have organically grown, right? The different classrooms have organically grown pipelines of communication with the home, whether they were using Remind or Edmodo or Google Classroom or Microsoft Teams, or there's a bunch. And now we're going to close school. We had complete and total uncertainty and anxiety around what we're going to be doing in these 50 some odd days of school that we're essentially negating. And then we're going to go ahead and sever the only pipeline that the families and the children and the teachers were accustomed to. We didn't want to do that. We thought that was not going to, that was counterintuitive. And so we didn't, but we still stayed rigidly flexible in that we continued to push Microsoft Teams. Microsoft Teams is a platform of choice. Also, we're dealing with a unionized labor group, right? So teachers are unionized. You can't just impose certain things that affect their craft. And so what we wanted to do was to get them to move from all of these different troughs that they were using to one. And we've been pretty successful in that we've gone from 18,000 users in Teams to 250,000. But we didn't do it by imposing. We certainly didn't do it by severing pipelines of communication that they had already in place since the very beginning of the year, and in some cases, multiple years. We wanted to make sure that we had as many pipes of communication open as possible, but knowing that we wanted to kind of reorient them to one. And that's what we've essentially done. Let's see. And yes, parents were somewhat frustrated at the very beginning. We're no longer receiving any of that kind of feedback. And it wasn't a critical mass, but certainly it was understandable to some. All right. Thank you, Jody. She's funny. All right. Let's see. Can you explain more how it worked with QR codes? Yes, this is, I think the person that asked me this was Jonathan. And so an attendance with early learning. Yes, so I'm over instructional technology, but I'm also over information technology, which is a bear. And my technicians and my folks in information technology were not very happy with me because I kept harping. I'm a former elementary principal, and I kept harping about the fact that I didn't feel a sense of comfort that all students and families would remember their credentials from one day to the next. And the checklist, by the way, included, how to sign in, what are your, write down your credentials. But, we can't rely on parents that are working from home, maybe parents that are essential workers that are not necessarily supervising their children, parents that don't speak English, to be able to help their children. And then certainly we had students with significant disabilities. And so what we did was we reached out to a partner. That partner is Clever. It's the entity that provides us with single sign-on. So all of our students enter our student portal, our teachers enter the student portal, and that's how they access the applications and tools that, for the most part, that are curated in ICP. And you can see all of those by grade, man, and subject in the ICP plan itself. And so one of the things that I knew, and we had explored this and dabbled in it a year or two ago, was that Clever also had the option of, instead of entering username and password, that you could use QR codes. So that was already a tool or an option within Clever. We weren't exercising it at scale. So I pushed really hard We sent out information to teachers and principals on how to print the QR codes, and kids went home with those QR codes laminated, the little guys, and students with significant disabilities. And so they essentially, all of our devices that we gave out have cameras. So the students essentially, to sign on, they show on their camera their QR code and they're into the system. Kelly, I think we are out of time. Do I have time for one more? How are we doing?
I think there's only one more question, so why don't we answer that and then we'll wrap it up.
Which one is it? Do you want to read it for me? Because I have
the re-entry question.
The re-entry question.
They said, how are we planning for re-entry?
Okay, yeah, well, that's a whole different webinar. So we have a sizable group of folks that include, you know, school site practitioners, parents, student, a lot of medical advisory personnel that are conducting meetings in a working group. And so we're looking at a lot of different resources, and frankly, the CDC, the McKinsey group has been very helpful in putting out sort of frameworks for developing your reopening plans. But in a nutshell, for us right now, what it looks like, and I'm only gonna speak from the instructional side because we could be here all day talking about the logistics and operational side, is we are surveying parents. That survey ended on Wednesday. We are currently, it's a lot of data, and we're analyzing that data so that we can provide parents options. And we also we're working with our state because we're seeking waivers around seat time and other constraints that allow us to not be as innovative as we want to be in terms of receiving funding and being innovative in delivery. But essentially what it looks like in a nutshell, and we'll be posting more about this, is we will offer parents brick and mortar experiences, so full day in school. We will offer like blended experiences where they're coming to school some days or part of the day or some weeks and not other weeks. And then the third option is fully online. And so we're still working through the mechanics of those, but those are essentially the big kind of options that parents are going to have. And our parents right now, our surveys are indicating they're pretty much split three ways. Although we understand this is conditional, and as conditions change, their desires and the demand for their options will change as well, and we'll keep monitoring that.
Awesome, thank you, Marie. So on behalf of the entire team at Tech and Learning, I want to thank everyone for attending today's session. Thank you again to Marie for presenting for us. We have our next session coming up at 11 o'clock. And again, a special thanks to our sponsors that make this event possible: Catch On, Classcraft, FileWave, Global Teletherapy, GradeCam, and Sanford Programs. If you do have any questions that weren't answered, feel free to go into the conference hub, and there's a chat with the speakers section. You can put any questions you have in there. We'll make sure those questions get over to the speakers. And again, there's also the passport to prizes. So as you explore the conference hub, you'll find some buttons you can enter passport to prizes, and we will announce those winners at the end of the conference. So we're going to go ahead and take a quick break, and we'll be back at 11 o'clock for our next session. Thank you, everyone.
Bye-bye.